"I've gone too long without a man," the Apache girl said to Lonely Rancher. At the edge of the desert, a small ranch lay quiet under the morning light. It was a modest place, with a wooden fence that had seen better days, and a weathered barn that creaked whenever the wind blew. This was the home of a man who had spent most of his life alone. People in the nearby town often whispered about him, calling him the Lonely Rancher. He was a man of few words, shaped by years of solitude and hard work, but there was a quiet strength about him that made others respect him from a distance. The rancher was just finishing his early morning chores. He walked along the fence line, checking the posts for signs of weakness, his boots crunching over the dry soil. He paused to watch his cattle grazing, the sun glinting off their coats, and for a moment he allowed himself to feel a kind of peaceful contentment. Life on the ranch was simple but steady. The routine gave him comfort, even if it came at the cost of companionship. His family had long since moved away or passed on, leaving him to manage the land and animals by himself. Most evenings he would sit by the fireplace, a mug of coffee in hand, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the cabin walls, wishing he had someone to talk to, someone who could break the silence of his long days. On this particular morning, however, the quiet of the ranch was about to be broken. Not far from the ranch, a young Apache woman was traveling along a dusty trail. She was strong and independent, with sharp eyes that missed nothing around her. Her hair was dark and thick, flowing freely over her shoulders, and her movements had a grace that came from years of living close to the land. She had been raised with lessons of resilience and courage, taught to face challenges head-on, but even someone as strong as her could feel the ache of loneliness. Life had taught her that independence was important, but the heart had its own needs. As she approached the ranch, she spotted the man at work among the fences and cattle. For a moment, she just watched, curious. She had heard about him from travelers and traders, how he kept to himself, how the town folks rarely saw him speak to anyone. But now, seeing him in person, she felt a strange pull. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper, a recognition that perhaps this man, too, carried a quiet longing in his heart. She decided to approach. The sound of her footsteps on the dry soil made the rancher look up. At first, his eyes narrowed with caution. He wasn't used to visitors, especially ones who approached without warning. Most people respected the distance of the ranch and stayed away. But there was something about her confidence, the way she walked with purpose, that immediately caught his attention. When she reached the fence, she spoke boldly, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "I've gone too long without a man," she said simply, without hesitation or embarrassment. The rancher blinked. He stared at her, unsure if he had heard correctly. The words hung in the air, strange and direct, yet somehow sincere. He had expected a polite greeting or a question about the ranch, but not this confession, this openness. For a moment, he was completely unprepared. His life had been a quiet one, filled with routines and solitude, and suddenly, here was a person willing to speak so freely, so honestly. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out at first. He simply watched her, noticing the fire in her eyes, the determination in her posture. There was no shame or fear in her expression, only honesty. Slowly, he found his voice. I'm not sure what to say," he admitted, his voice rough from years of little use in conversation. She smiled faintly, tilting her head as if to say, "That's okay." "I just thought," she continued, "that maybe someone like you might understand. Sometimes the heart grows too quiet and the days feel longer than they should." The rancher looked down at the ground, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to sharing his feelings with anyone, let alone a stranger. Yet in that moment, something shifted inside him. Her words, spoken so plainly, touched a part of him that had been buried under years of work and solitude. He realized that he had missed companionship more than he had allowed himself to admit. For a while, they stood in silence. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, and the cattle continued to graze, seemingly unaware of the unusual meeting unfolding nearby. The rancher finally gestured toward the barn. "Would you like some water?" he asked cautiously, a small offer of hospitality. She nodded, and together they walked to the barn. He filled a tin cup with cool water from the well, handing it to her. She took it gratefully, her eyes meeting his as if to say thank you, and in that gaze the rancher felt a spark of connection that he hadn't experienced in years. They began talking, first about simple things, the weather, the cattle, the land. Slowly, the conversation deepened. She told him about her life, her family, and the lessons she had learned from growing up Apache. She spoke of the beauty of her traditions, the strength of her people, and the quiet sadness that sometimes accompanied independence. He listened, genuinely curious, and for the first time in a long time, he shared a little about himself. The loss he had endured, the long years of solitude, and the dreams he had quietly abandoned. As the morning turned into afternoon, neither noticed how quickly the hours passed. There was a sense of comfort in their exchange, a rare feeling of being understood. The rancher realized that her presence brought a warmth he hadn't known he was missing. She in turn felt the same, appreciating the kindness and quiet strength she saw in him. By the time the sun was high in the sky, the Apache girl rose to leave. She thanked him for the water and the conversation, her voice gentle but firm. "I should be going," she said, "but I'll return. I like this place and I like talking to you." The rancher watched her leave, feeling a strange emptiness that he hadn't expected. Yet there was also hope, a flicker of anticipation that perhaps this meeting was the beginning of something new, something that could change the rhythm of his lonely days. As she disappeared down the dusty trail, he turned back to his chores, but his mind lingered on her words and her presence. For the first time in a long while, the quiet ranch didn't feel quite so empty. He realized that life could still surprise him, that connection and companionship might be possible, even in the most unexpected ways. The day went on, but the encounter stayed with him. Every sound, the wind through the trees, the lowing of the cattle, the creak of the barn door, seemed different now. There was a sense of anticipation, a gentle reminder that sometimes, even in the most isolated places, life could bring unexpected meetings that change everything. And deep down, the rancher felt that perhaps this meeting with the Apache girl was only the beginning. Days passed since the Apache girl had first appeared at the ranch, and yet her presence lingered in the rancher's thoughts. Each morning, he went about his chores with a quiet tension, half expecting her to arrive along the dusty trail. The rancher had always been a solitary man, content with the routine of his life, feeding the cattle, mending fences, and keeping the land in order. But now, the memory of her bold words, "I've gone too long without a man," returned to him again and again. It was strange how such a simple phrase could stir feelings he hadn't felt in years. On the fourth day after their first meeting, she appeared again. This time, she carried a small basket with her, and her steps were purposeful as she approached the ranch. The rancher was leaning against the barn, wiping sweat from his brow after feeding the horses, when he spotted her coming down the trail. His heart skipped, though he quickly tried to hide it behind his calm exterior. "Good morning," she called cheerfully, raising her hand in greeting. He nodded, offering a small smile. "Morning. I wasn't expecting you so soon." "I thought I'd check on you," she said lightly, but her eyes sparkled with sincerity, "and maybe help you with your work today." "It seems like a lot for one person." Her words were kind but firm. The rancher hesitated, unsure how to respond. He was not used to people helping him, and he certainly was not used to someone as confident and spirited as her offering to do so without hesitation. But he felt a deep relief. Perhaps it was time to let someone in. For the next several hours, they worked side by side. She helped mend fences, carrying tools and hammering posts with a strength that impressed him. She handled the animals with care, soothing nervous calves and moving them gently into the pens. He watched her quietly, noticing how natural she was with the land, as if it were a part of her being. Her laughter was easy and genuine when a young calf slipped on the dry ground, and for the first time in years, the rancher found himself smiling freely, a warmth spreading in his chest. As they paused for a break, sitting in the shade of a small tree, she shared stories about her life and her people. She spoke about growing up near the mountains, learning the ways of her ancestors, and the lessons her parents and elders had taught her. Her stories were vivid and full of life, painting a picture of a world that was both different from his and yet familiar in its love for the land and animals. The rancher listened intently, asking questions, and occasionally sharing his own experiences. He spoke of the ranch, the long hours of work, and the quiet evenings by the fire. He talked about the loss he had endured, though he carefully avoided the deepest sorrows of his past. Still, in her presence, he felt safe enough to admit that solitude could sometimes weigh heavily on a person. Throughout the day, they found a rhythm together, their movements around the ranch almost instinctively coordinated. There was a quiet understanding between them, a sense of trust that seemed to grow with each shared task. The rancher noticed little things about her, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about the mountains, the way her hands moved with confidence when handling tools, and the way her laughter seemed to echo even in the wide-open spaces of the ranch. When the afternoon sun was high, they stopped to drink water. She handed him a small gourd filled from the well, and he took it gratefully. They stood in silence for a moment, the quiet of the ranch enveloping them. It was a comfortable silence, not awkward or forced, but filled with an unspoken understanding. "You make this place seem different," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "It feels peaceful here, even though it's so far from everything else." He looked at her, noticing the sincerity in her tone. "It is peaceful," he admitted, "but sometimes it feels lonely. It's been years since I've had someone to talk to, someone to share the quiet with." She nodded, her gaze meeting his. "I know that feeling," she said simply. Sometimes, being strong and independent doesn't stop the heart from wanting more. For a moment, the rancher considered her words carefully. She understood more than he expected. Most people in town had judged him for his solitude, calling him stubborn or strange. But she didn't judge. She simply recognized the truth of his life. That realization brought a strange mix of relief and hope. Perhaps he was not as alone as he had thought. Over the next few days, her visits became more regular. Sometimes she would come to help with chores, other times just to share a meal or conversation. The rancher found himself looking forward to these moments more than he cared to admit. He noticed that the animals seemed to respond to her presence as well, calmer and more comfortable around her than they had been with him alone. The townsfolk began to notice their growing friendship. Some whispered disapprovingly, questioning why the Apache girl spent so much time with the rancher, while others watched with curiosity. Yet, the rancher did not care for their opinions. What mattered to him was the trust and companionship that was forming between them. He realized that her presence brought him a sense of connection he had longed for, a feeling he had nearly forgotten existed. One evening, as the sun began to set, and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, they sat together on a small rise overlooking the ranch. The rancher took a deep breath, feeling a peace he had not known in years. The Apache girl leaned back on her hands, gazing at the horizon with a quiet smile. "It's beautiful here," she said, her voice soft. "I've seen many places, but there's something about this that feels right." He nodded, unsure how to put his feelings into words. "It feels right because it's real," he finally said. "This place, this land, the work, and now, having you here, it's real, honest. Something I've missed." She turned to him, her expression gentle. "I'm glad you feel that way," she said. "I've gone too long without someone to share my days with too. I think maybe we both needed this." The rancher felt a warmth spread through his chest. Her words were honest, unguarded, and they mirrored his own unspoken thoughts. In that moment he realized that this connection, unexpected and surprising, was something rare and precious. Days turned into weeks and their friendship deepened. They shared stories of the past, hopes for the future, and quiet moments that didn't need words. The rancher found himself laughing more, feeling lighter, and even looking forward to the simple routines of the ranch, knowing she might appear at any moment. The Apache girl, in turn, found comfort in his steadiness, his quiet strength, and the unspoken care he showed for her. Yet, even with their growing bond, both were aware of the challenges they might face. Life in the town and the expectations of their families and communities could make their connection difficult. But for now, those worries felt distant. In the wide openness of the ranch, under the endless sky and the warmth of the sun, they had found something meaningful: trust, friendship, and the beginnings of something deeper. And so, the lonely rancher and the Apache girl continued to meet, their days intertwined with work, laughter, and shared stories. Each encounter brought them closer, not just as friends, but as two people discovering that even in the quietest and most isolated places, the heart could find connection, understanding, and hope. The rancher, who had spent so long in solitude, began to feel a sense of anticipation each morning. He knew that when she arrived, the day would feel lighter, fuller, and somehow more alive. And the Apache girl, who had been independent and resilient for so long, found that her heart had room for more than strength. It had room for companionship, trust, and the quiet joy of sharing life with someone who understood her. In those early days of their growing friendship, the foundation of a deep and lasting connection was quietly taking root, unseen by anyone else, yet strong enough to withstand the challenges that might come in the future. And both of them, in their own ways, understood that what they were building together was rare, a bond not born of convenience or circumstance, but of honest hearts meeting in the middle of a vast, open world. The days on the ranch had grown warmer, and the sun now climbed higher in the sky, making the air shimmer over the dry earth. The rancher and the Apache girl had settled into a comfortable routine. She visited often, helping with chores, sharing meals, and telling stories from her life. The rancher had begun to notice changes in himself. He laughed more freely, worked with more energy, and even looked forward to each new day with a quiet hope he had not felt in years. One afternoon, as they were rounding up the cattle for inspection, a sudden commotion erupted near the far corner of the pasture. Several cows were running, their heads low and hooves pounding the dry ground. A young calf had gotten trapped in a narrow ditch, struggling to free itself. The rancher and the Apache girl ran toward it, shouting to calm the other animals. The rancher's heart raced as he approached the distressed calf. He knew the animals well, but in moments like this, even familiarity could not eliminate the fear that something might go wrong. The calf had slipped too far down the ditch, and its small body was wedged in a way that made it impossible for it to climb out alone. Without hesitation, the Apache girl jumped down into the shallow ditch beside the calf. Her movements were careful and deliberate as she crouched beside the frightened animal, murmuring softly to calm it. The rancher watched her, amazed at her courage and skill. She seemed unafraid even in the face of danger, and her calm confidence spread to the rancher as well. "Hold it steady," she called up to him, her hands gently guiding the calf's small body. He grabbed a length of rope and tied it around the calf carefully, trying not to startle it further. Working together, they pulled with synchronized effort. Sweat ran down their faces, dust clung to their clothes, and their muscles ached from the strain, but neither stopped. They communicated with quiet gestures, a shared understanding that needed no words. Finally, with one last strong pull, the calf tumbled out of the ditch, landing safely on the soft dirt. The Apache girl patted its head gently, speaking to it in a low, soothing tone. The rancher stepped back, letting her take the lead, and felt a sense of pride and admiration for her bravery. "That was incredible," he said, breathing heavily, as they both stood to catch their breath. "I don't know what I would have done without you." She smiled, brushing dust from her hands. "We make a good team," she replied. "Sometimes it's easier to face challenges when you have someone by your side." In that moment, the rancher realized something important. He had spent so many years avoiding vulnerability, fearing that opening himself to others might bring pain or disappointment. Yet, in the act of helping each other, he had discovered trust, courage, and a sense of partnership he had never known. The Apache girl had not just helped save a calf, she had helped him rediscover a part of himself he had long buried. The incident with the calf became a turning point in their relationship. Afterward, they continued their work with a new sense of closeness. They shared small victories, laughed at minor mistakes, and encouraged each other when tasks became difficult. Even the cattle seemed calmer when they were together, as if sensing the harmony between the two humans caring for them. One evening, after the work was done, they sat on the porch of the rancher's cabin, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The sky was a brilliant mix of gold and purple, and the air was filled with the gentle hum of insects and the distant lowing of cattle. The rancher held a mug of coffee in his hands, savoring the quiet, and she sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've never felt like this before," the rancher admitted quietly. "Not with anyone. It's strange but good. I think I've forgotten what it feels like to have someone around." She turned to him, her dark eyes full of understanding. "It's okay to feel that way," she said softly. "Being alone for so long doesn't mean you have to stay that way. Sometimes the right person comes along when you least expect it." He looked at her, studying her face in the fading light. There was honesty in her expression, a sincerity that cut through the walls he had built around his heart. I didn't expect to meet someone like you," he said, his voice low but steady. "I didn't think it was possible anymore." She smiled gently, reaching out to rest her hand briefly on his arm. "Life can surprise us," she said simply. "Even in the quietest, loneliest places, something new can grow." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of wind rattling the old barn doors. Yet, instead of feeling uneasy, the rancher felt a calm reassurance. The day's challenges, the work, and even the minor dangers of ranch life no longer seemed as intimidating with her by his side. He realized that companionship didn't erase difficulty, it made it easier to face. Over the following weeks, the bond between them strengthened even further. They shared more than work. They shared stories, dreams, and quiet reflections. The Apache girl spoke of her hopes to see more of the land, to continue learning from her family and ancestors, and to one day help her community in meaningful ways. The rancher, in turn, opened up about his past losses, the struggles he faced after his family had moved away, and the loneliness that had filled the long years on the ranch. As the seasons began to shift, the rancher found himself becoming more open, more willing to express his feelings, and more attentive to the needs of others. The Apache girl had brought light into a life that had been shadowed by solitude. In return, he offered her stability, support, and a sense of belonging she had longed for. Their relationship was not yet defined by titles or promises, but it was growing into something meaningful, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. However, life was never without its challenges. One afternoon, as they were repairing a section of fencing near the far edge of the ranch, a storm began to form on the horizon. Dark clouds rolled in quickly, and the wind picked up, rattling the wooden posts and carrying dust and dry leaves into the air. The rancher realized they needed to secure the animals before the storm hit. Together, they worked swiftly, guiding the cattle into the barn and tying down loose materials around the ranch. The storm arrived faster than expected, and heavy rain began to fall, drenching the land and turning the dirt into slippery mud. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by the deep rumble of thunder. Despite the chaos, the Apache girl remained calm, her movements precise and deliberate. She helped the rancher lift a heavy gate that had fallen loose, and together they managed to secure the remaining cattle. Their teamwork during the storm strengthened their bond even further. They learned to rely on each other in moments of pressure, trusting instincts, judgment, and courage. After the storm passed, the rancher and the Apache girl sat on the porch again, soaked but laughing at the ordeal. The air was fresh, clean, and filled with the smell of wet earth. The rancher looked at her, realizing that their shared experiences, both ordinary and extraordinary, were bringing them closer in ways he had never anticipated. "I never thought life could feel like this," he said quietly, glancing at the horizon where the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. "Busy, difficult, unpredictable, but alive. I feel alive when I'm with you." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the late afternoon. "That's because we face it together," she said. "We help each other, and in doing so, we find strength we didn't know we had." That evening, as the stars began to twinkle over the wide-open desert, the rancher and the Apache girl realized that their connection was no longer simply about companionship. It had evolved into something deeper, a shared understanding of courage, trust, and the comfort of having someone who truly sees you. Their days together were now filled not only with work and survival, but also with moments of laughter, quiet reflection, and the beginnings of emotional intimacy. In facing challenges, whether a trapped calf, a storm, or the daily hardships of ranch life, they had discovered the power of partnership. And in each other's presence, they had found a sense of belonging that neither had expected. They were no longer two people alone in the vast desert. They were a team, learning to navigate life together, one day at a time. And as night fell over the rancher knew that this bond, born of trust and shared experience, was something rare and precious. In the quiet after the storm, with the cool night air settling over the land, he understood that life could still surprise him, that connection could still grow, and that even the loneliest heart could find companionship when least expected. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between the rancher and the Apache girl continued to grow stronger. They had shared laughter, hard work, quiet moments, and even the tension of storms and emergencies. The rancher no longer felt the deep weight of loneliness he had carried for years, and the Apache girl had discovered a comfort and warmth she had not expected in this remote corner of the desert. Yet, even as their connection deepened, both of them began to feel the weight of the outside world pressing in on their fragile happiness. It started with the townsfolk. Some of the neighbors had noticed the frequent visits of the Apache girl to the ranch. Whispers began to travel through the small town, gossip about a young woman spending so much time with a man who was not part of her community, questioning whether it was proper or acceptable. At first, the rancher tried to ignore the talk, telling himself that what mattered was their own happiness, not the opinions of others. But even a man who had lived in solitude for years could not completely shield himself from the quiet sting of judgment. The Apache girl, too, was aware of the scrutiny. She had grown up strong and independent, learning to navigate the expectations of her family and community. But the constant awareness of how others might perceive her actions sometimes made her hesitant. She loved spending time at the ranch, but she also felt the tug of duty and loyalty to her family and heritage. She began to wonder if her closeness with the rancher might create tension or misunderstanding, not only among the townspeople, but also within her own community. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a section of the barn roof, a silence fell between them. The rancher sensed that something was troubling her. She was quieter than usual, her movements slower, and she kept glancing toward the distant hills, as if searching for answers in the landscape. "Is something wrong?" he asked gently, pausing in his work. She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "I'm just thinking," she said softly, "about the people in town, about my family. I care about them, and I don't want to cause worry or trouble. I want to be here with you, but I also know that life isn't always simple." He nodded, understanding more than she might have expected. "I know," he said quietly. "I've spent most of my life alone, and I've avoided people because I didn't want complications. But I care about you too. That's what matters, not what others think." She looked at him, a mixture of relief and doubt in her eyes. "I care about you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But sometimes I wonder if we can really be together without facing problems from the world around us." The rancher placed a reassuring hand on hers. "We can face them together," he said firmly. "We can't control what others think, but we can control how we act and how we care for each other. That has to be enough." Even with these reassurances, doubt lingered in their hearts. The Apache girl struggled to balance her desire for companionship with her responsibilities and identity. The rancher wrestled with fears of judgment and the lingering effects of years spent in isolation. Both of them knew that love and friendship alone could not solve every challenge. They would need courage, patience, and understanding. One evening, the rancher's thoughts were interrupted by a visitor from town, a neighbor who had come to offer help but also brought with him the undercurrent of gossip. "You've got quite the friend visiting you," the man said casually, though there was a pointed tone in his words. "Some folks in town are talking. They say she shouldn't be spending so much time here." The rancher felt a flush of irritation but kept his composure. "She helps with the work," he said simply, "and she's welcome here. That's all that matters." The neighbor shrugged, unconvinced, and left, leaving the rancher with a quiet unease. He knew that the opinions of others would not stop him from valuing the Apache girl's presence, but he also realized that their growing relationship would not always be free from challenges. Meanwhile, the Apache girl faced her own internal struggle. One morning, she sat quietly near the well, her thoughts tangled. She loved the rancher and enjoyed the time they spent together, but she worried about what her family might say, what her community might think, and whether she could maintain her independence while growing closer to someone else. She felt a tension between her heart and her sense of duty, a feeling she had experienced before but never so intensely. When the rancher approached, he noticed her concern. "You're worried," he said softly. She nodded, looking down at the ground. "I am," she admitted. "I want to be with you, but I also want to respect my family and the life I come from. Sometimes it feels like I have to choose between two parts of myself." He sat beside her, offering quiet support. "You don't have to make a choice right now," he said. "We can take things one step at a time. We can learn how to be together without losing who we are. I want us to find a way that works for both of us." Her eyes met his, and in that moment she felt a wave of relief. He didn't demand answers or rush her decisions. He simply offered patience, understanding, and trust, qualities she had learned to value deeply. Even so, the days that followed brought new pressures. The Apache girl received letters from her family, reminding her of her responsibilities and expressing concern about her frequent visits to the ranch. The rancher noticed her unease, and they spoke quietly about it during breaks in their work. They realized that their relationship could not exist in isolation. It was connected to the lives of others, to expectations, and to the realities of the world around them. Despite these challenges, they also discovered moments of joy and tenderness. One afternoon, as they finished mending a fence, the rancher handed her a small bundle of wildflowers he had picked along the trail. She laughed softly, touched by the gesture, and placed them in her hair. In that simple exchange, they were reminded that love and care could exist even amid uncertainty and doubt. Their friendship became a delicate balance between work and leisure, between independence and connection, and between their own desires and the expectations of others. Yet with each passing day, they learned to navigate the complexities with patience and understanding. They discovered that love was not always easy, but it was worth effort, courage, and compromise. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the Apache girl spoke of her dreams. "I want to help my family and my community," she said, "but I also want to be here to share my life with you. I don't want to give up either part of myself." The rancher nodded thoughtfully. "And you don't have to," he said. "We can figure it out together. We can build a life that honors who we are, where we come from, and what we care about." Her eyes glistened with gratitude and hope. For the first time in a long while, she felt that it might be possible to reconcile her heart's desires with her responsibilities and identity. The rancher, too, felt a renewed sense of determination. He realized that the obstacles outside and within themselves were not walls, they were challenges to be faced together. The weeks that followed were filled with both reflection and action. They continued to work on the ranch, sharing tasks and stories, laughter and quiet moments. They also spent time discussing their hopes, fears, and boundaries, learning to communicate openly and honestly. In doing so, they built a foundation of trust that strengthened their bond and gave them confidence to face the uncertainties of the world around them. Through it all, they discovered that love was not just about comfort or companionship. It was about courage, patience, and understanding. It was about recognizing the fears and pressures of life and choosing to face them together. It was about being willing to be vulnerable, to trust, and to support one another even when challenges arose. And in those quiet desert evenings, under the endless sky, the rancher and the Apache girl found reassurance in their connection. They knew that external pressures and internal doubts would always exist, but they also knew that their bond, built on trust, care, and mutual respect, could endure. They had learned that life was not about avoiding difficulties. It was about facing them together, with courage, patience, and love. In the heart of the desert, where life could be harsh and unforgiving, they had discovered a rare and precious truth. That connection, understanding, and shared hope could flourish even in the face of challenges, and that love, when nurtured with care, could be stronger than any obstacle. The desert had settled into the quiet calm of early morning. The sky was painted with soft streaks of pink and gold, and the air was cool, carrying the scent of sagebrush and earth after the night's gentle breeze. On the ranch, life had grown into a rhythm that was both steady and comforting. The rancher and the Apache girl had spent many weeks together, learning to balance work, companionship, and the challenges that life had presented. They had faced storms, physical labor, doubts, and the quiet judgment of others. Yet through it all, they had discovered a deep trust and a connection that felt unbreakable. This morning, the Apache girl arrived at the ranch earlier than usual. She carried a small basket of fresh bread and wild herbs she had gathered from the nearby hills. Her steps were light and confident, and her smile brightened the rancher's heart before he even saw her. She greeted him warmly, and he returned the greeting with a small smile, feeling the familiar warmth of anticipation for the day ahead. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, placing the basket on the table outside the cabin. "I thought we could have breakfast before starting the chores. It feels like a special day." The rancher raised an eyebrow, curious. "A special day? What makes today special?" She looked at him with playful seriousness. "Because today, I want us to enjoy the work, the land, and each other's company without worry. No thoughts of what people think, no doubts about the future, just today." He nodded thoughtfully. It was a small request, yet it carried weight. Over the past weeks, they had learned that the simplest moments, shared without distraction or worry, were sometimes the most meaningful. They sat together, breaking bread, sharing the herbs, and enjoying the quiet. The sun rose higher, casting a golden glow over the ranch, and for a time it felt as though the world had paused just for them. After breakfast, they began the day's work, tending to the cattle and repairing fences. The rancher noticed how effortlessly they moved together now, their actions almost instinctive, as if they had developed an unspoken language of cooperation. She handed him tools without being asked. He guided animals with her support, and neither felt the weight of solitude that had defined their past lives. As the day progressed, the rancher realized that their bond had grown stronger not just through words, but through shared effort. Every task completed side by side, every challenge met together, had built a foundation far more resilient than he had ever imagined. The Apache girl had brought life into his quiet existence, and he had offered her stability, safety, and unwavering support. They had both changed, grown, and learned to trust in the presence of another. Later that afternoon, they paused near the edge of the pasture to watch the sun slowly descend. The sky was a magnificent display of color, shifting from deep gold to soft purple, and the land stretched endlessly in every direction. The rancher felt a sudden impulse to speak, to put into words the emotions that had been quietly growing inside him for weeks. "I've realized something," he said, his voice low but steady. "Before you came, I thought I could live a life of solitude forever. I thought I was content with the quiet, the work, and the land. But you've shown me there's more to life than that. You've shown me that companionship, trust, and shared moments are just as important as any other part of life." The Apache girl's eyes softened. "I feel the same," she said gently. "I've always been independent and I've learned to rely on myself. But with you, I've learned that it's possible to care for someone, to let someone care for you, and still remain strong and true to who you are." He took her hand in his, holding it firmly but tenderly. "I don't want to lose us. I want to continue building our life together, facing whatever comes our way and sharing the good and the hard days. I want us to be part of each other's lives, fully and honestly." Tears of happiness glimmered in her eyes, and she squeezed his hand in return. "I want that too," she whispered. "I've felt alone for too long, and now I see that it's possible to find someone who understands, who supports, and who walks beside you without taking away your independence. I want to be with you, if we can continue to face the world together." The rancher nodded, his chest swelling with emotion. "Then we will," he said simply, "together." Over the next few days, they began making small plans for the future. They repaired sections of the barn, tended to the land, and cared for the cattle with renewed energy and purpose. But now their work carried a new meaning. Every nail hammered, every fence post straightened, every animal guided safely. These were not just tasks, but acts of shared life. Their teamwork was no longer just about efficiency. It was a celebration of connection, trust, and commitment. The townsfolk began to notice a change as well. Whispers that once carried judgment began to soften. Neighbors saw the two working together, helping the animals and sharing quiet, respectful moments. Slowly, respect replaced gossip. People realized that their bond was genuine, built on trust and care, not on fleeting passion or impropriety. The rancher and the Apache girl were no longer just a topic of curiosity. They were a symbol of partnership and resilience, admired for their strength and unity. One evening, as twilight settled over the ranch, they sat on the porch once again, looking out over the vast expanse of land that stretched to the distant hills. The stars began to appear, twinkling like tiny diamonds scattered across the darkening sky. The Apache girl leaned against the rancher's shoulder, and he placed an arm around her, feeling the comfort of their closeness. "I never thought life could feel like this," he said softly. "Full, peaceful, and yet alive with possibility. You've given me something I didn't know I was missing." She smiled, tilting her head to look at him. "And you've given me a home in your heart," she replied. "A place where I can be myself, where I can be strong and cared for at the same time. I've waited a long time for this." The quiet of the desert surrounded them, but it no longer felt lonely. It was filled with the sound of the land, the animals, and the unspoken bond between two hearts that had found each other. They sat together in silence, sharing warmth, comfort, and the unspoken promise that whatever challenges came their way, they would face them as partners. As the months passed, life on the ranch continued with its simple rhythm, yet it was richer than ever before. They planted small gardens together, repaired fences, tended to the cattle, and prepared for the changing seasons. Every day carried the weight of labor, but also the joy of shared accomplishment. They celebrated small victories, like the birth of a calf or the successful repair of a long-damaged fence, and they comforted each other in moments of fatigue or doubt. Their friendship and partnership became stronger than any external pressure or internal worry. The rancher no longer feared judgment, and the Apache girl no longer felt torn between duty and desire. Together, they had found a balance that honored their individual identities while embracing the bond they shared. One afternoon, as they walked along the trail at the edge of the property, the Apache girl stopped and turned to the rancher. "I think we've found something rare," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Something that not everyone can experience. A life that is both ours and a part of the land, a connection that is honest, strong, and true." He nodded, feeling the truth of her words deep in his chest. "Yes," he said, "something worth protecting, worth nurturing, and worth celebrating every day." As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows over the ranch, they stood together, hand in hand, looking out over the land that had been the stage for their growing bond. The world around them, its challenges, judgments, and uncertainties, felt less threatening because they faced it together. They had discovered that the heart could heal, the spirit could flourish, and life could be shared in its full richness when two people committed to understanding and supporting each other. And so, the lonely rancher and the Apache girl found their resolution, not in grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but in quiet mornings, shared work, laughter, and the knowledge that they could rely on each other. They had discovered that love was not just about romance or passion, but about trust, respect, and the courage to face life together. The desert stretched endlessly around them, vast and untamed, yet within it, they had carved a space of belonging, hope, and fulfillment. The rancher no longer walked alone, and the Apache girl no longer carried the weight of solitude. Together, they had created a life rooted in honesty, patience, and a rare kind of love, one that promised to endure through all the seasons of their shared journey. And as night fell over the ranch, the stars shining brightly overhead, they knew that this was only the beginning, a beginning of a life filled with shared dreams, unwavering support, and the quiet, enduring joy of being together.